All right, let's get started. We finished up with Gideon last week, and man, oh man, what a great study. Is that faith? You stop and think about his army of 300 defeated an army of 120,000. You know the numbers, the odds against that happening? Every one of those 300 had to kill 4,000 of the Midianites. By faith, they did it. And I don't want to overemphasize what we said a few minutes ago, but man, the book of Judges shows what faith is. After Gideon does and wins this battle, they come to Gideon and they say, Gideon, be our king. You know Gideon's response? I will not be your king. You already have one, and that's God Almighty. He refused to be king. Gideon had a son named Abimelech. Guess what he wanted to be? He, in reality, was the first king of the Jews. He ruled as king for 8 years. He said, my father didn't want it, I want it, and oh, what a mess he made of his life. Anybody remember how he died? A woman killed him. You remember what that was? They surrounded this tower where the people were, and a woman dropped a millstone. You know what a millstone is? And dropped it from high up, and it killed him. I love to teach the book of Judges to little kids. It is so fascinating there's so much imagery that's in that. Now, the word millstone, you know what it is. Several years ago, more than 40 years ago, there was a marriage ceremony at Palm Beach Lakes where the man wanted to say, you've come to this milestone in your life. Guess what he said in the ceremony? You have come to this millstone in your life. That's just a bit of trivia, and that I'd hate for that to happen. It was not Dan who did it. I'm going to tell you who it was, none of your business. But every time I read the word millstone, that's all I can think about. I've said some really weird things in my preaching. I don't know that I've said in a wedding ceremony anything like that. You've come to a millstone. No, it's a milestone that you've come to in your life. We got to hurry to get through this. Dave and I, as we talked about how long do we spend on Soldiers of Christ? Let's spend at least 2 or 3 months. How long have we been on it? 4 or 5 months already? And we're trying to finish the book of Judges. May even try to get to the book of Ruth tonight. Who is the judge who made the foolish promise? You remember what his name was? It was Jephthah. What promise did he make? Before we talk about it, you've got to understand that he was the son of a harlot, and his parents or his brothers ran him to a foreign country. He was raised among pagans. They came back to Jephthah and they said, Jephthah, will you lead us in battle? He created an army in this foreign country. He was a renegade and really doing well, and they needed someone to come and to lead the Jews. He said, I don't know why you need me. You haven't needed me ever in my life, but I will come. And so he came, and look at the vow that he made. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time looking at it, but look in Judges chapter 11, verse 30. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt sacrifice. It's hard for us with our sensibilities and thinking that we're really high moral people to imagine that to happen. He'd grown up in a society where that was done. If I say Molech, remember the god, that idol, not from the Ammonites, but from over in that area. That's where that god came from. And so he'd grown up with that in his life. And so he makes a vow to God. And when you get a little bit later in the chapter, he says, it's what is it, 39 or 40? Yes. And he carried out, verse 39, and he carried out the vow with her which he had vowed. I know there are individuals who try to say he didn't really do it, but I think it's remarkable when I read the vow, burnt offering. It doesn't say she'll be a nun, live a celibate life, because in realities, if you're Catholics and your daughter decided to be a thing of a nun in that religion, it's not a time of remorse. And yet he is filled with anguish whenever he sees his own daughter walk out of the house. It's the only child he had. Jephthah, the one who made the foolish vow, that's on the prophet king. The next question on the prophet card is the strong judge. Who's the strong judge? Well, it's Samson. Samson is an interesting character, and you know the story. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at the details of that study because we've studied these things and we're really trying to just review some of the things that we've known about all of our lives. The life of Samson, in many ways, depicts the nation of Israel. Samson started just right. Before he was ever born, the angel of the Lord came to Manoah, and particularly to Manoah's wife, Samson's mother and father, and says, from this day forward, don't you, Manoah's wife, don't you eat any grapes, and do not ever let your son eat grapes. And his parents take for him the Nazirite vow, a vow of consecration and dedication to Jesus Christ, or to God Almighty. And so he grew up just right. When he reaches adulthood, what's the first thing he does? Isn't that amazing? He sees a woman. He sees a Philistine woman, and he says, that's who I want in my life. And his mother said, I can't believe that. I cannot believe you're going to marry somebody like that. But he wanted her so much. And you may know the details of how all this happened. That's when he killed the lion, and out the bees had made honey inside the carcass of that lion. If you don't know that story, go home and read this section of the book of Judges. It is fascinating. He made up a riddle and told the Philistines, if you'll answer this riddle, I'll give you 30 garments, changes of garments, real nice garments if you just answer this riddle. And they could not answer it. But they get this woman, not Delilah, but the wife that he wanted. He got this woman to get him to tell what it was, and she told the Philistines. You know what Samson does? I love this. I love how Samson responds to this. Okay, I owe you 30 changes of garments. He goes out and kills 30 Philistines and brings their garments and says, here it is. It's a great story. How about him when he was in the gate and he carried the gates away? And Rick Hall, I shall forever respect what you made me see about this, because I had never thought, I just love your mind. You're much smarter than I am. But he said, I thought Samson was always LeBron James. In my mind, that's what Samson looked like. And Rick said in a study, he said, he could have been just a little Jewish man. And the miracles that he did is even more remarkable. All of that great strength that he had. Now then, they give the wife to his best man, the New King James describes, and so he doesn't get the wife that he wants. Talk about the foxes and catching the foxes and burning down but we don't have time to talk about all of that in relationship to Samson. Okay, Samson, you really messed it up. Yep, big time messed it up. Okay, Samson, what next? What about a harlot? You start talking about Samson being over there in Hebrews 11. God can use us. And here he is. He had struggles in this area of his life, and God makes a use of him. And so whatever your past life has been, understand, when you get to the end of Samson's life, when you get to the day of his death, do you understand how he died full of faith? Finally, Delilah tempts him until he finally gives the source of the strength that he receives, and that was, if you'll shave my head, I'll no longer be strong. I've never cut my hair one time since I was born, but if you shave my head, I'll lose all of my strength. When that happens, The Philistines take him, they bind him, they put his eyes out, and they put him in a place where he is grinding the grain. And on one occasion, the day of his death, they said he's over in the Philistine, he's a captive over there, he's a slave over there in that area. And they said, go get Samson and let's mock him, bring him out here to make fun of him. And so they brought Samson over there, and they're mocking Samson, and Samson asked an individual to take him to those two columns that are holding up that big building, and he catches hold of those two columns. Praise to God. God gives him his strength back, and he pulls that building down, and it kills 3,000 Philistines right there. Killed more in his death than he did in his life. Who's the woman that deceived? Not the wife. Who's the woman? Samson and Delilah, right? And so that's also on the king's card, and so we need to look at that. When you get to this point in the book of Judges, there are two judges after Samson. Samson's 13, 14 is Eli, and 15 is Samuel. Where am I going to read about Eli and Samuel? Not in the book of Judges. So we're through with the book of Judges. Those last 3 chapters of Judges, if you don't know what is in there in those last 3 chapters of Judges, where a man chops up his wife, concubine, into 12 pieces and sends body parts all over to all the nation of the Jews, go home and read it. See if you can figure out why he did it and all that is in there. Just trying to get you to quit your appetite to get in here and read these stories. You do not know the Old Testament. David and I have marveled as we're writing this about the life of Jesus. Both have said, I never knew this was in the Bible. I never knew this was in the Bible. It's almost every time we write, we think, how have we overlooked this? And that is a lot of times, I know about Samson. No, you don't know everything about the life of Samson. And those last 3 or 4 chapters of the book of Judges are remarkable indeed. What happens? What's the next book after Judges? Ruth. When does Ruth live? Ruth lives sometimes during the Judges. So we got a flashback. We got to back up. We don't know exactly when Ruth lives in relationship to this, but you know the story of Ruth, do you not? Ruth is a Moabite. She's not Jewish. The Moabites, where do the Moabites come from? If I say drunken, 3 letters, first one's L, is that going to help you? Drunken Lot. When Lot escapes is rescued from Sodom and Gomorrah, his daughters, 2 consecutive nights, have sex with him, get him drunk, have sex with him, and 2 of the Gentile nations, the Moabites and the Ammonites, are the result of that incest that was committed by Lot in relationship to this. She's a Moabite. Now then, there is a woman by the name of Naomi. The word Naomi means joy and happiness. But there's a famine among the Jews, and so Naomi and her husband, Elimelech, go down to where the Moabites are. They have 2 sons that's there. The 2 sons marry Moabites. Now, I'm going to tell you the names of one of those sons, okay? It is not Mahomes. It's Malone. I don't know if that'll help you remember it. Super Bowl Sunday night. How could you not know Mahomes in relationship to football tonight? Here is one of her sons, Mahomes. Now, if they were playing the Lions, you see, that'd make it real easy because the other son is Chilion. So that's not on the final test to get into heaven. I just made that association as I was trying to think about teaching this. Both sons die. They're down there for 10 years. And now Naomi is ready to go back to Palestine, back to her homeland. She and her two daughter-in-laws, Ruth and that lady that has that Sunday or has that afternoon program where she gave away all of those cars, what was her name? Oprah. Naomi has a daughter-in-law that is Orpah. And so when I first saw that television personality, I thought she's misspelled the name. No, she has recreated the name. And so it's interesting. It's O-R-P-A-H, Orpah. And so as they leave, Naomi says, don't go with me. I'm too old. Said, if I had children, would you wait around so that so that the other children I have might become your husbands? And they're standing there, and that's when Orpah says, I'm leaving. I'm going back. In fact, Naomi says, go back to your lands and back to your gods, with the S on it. You know what Ruth's response is? Entreat me not to leave thee. You know, I'm going with you, and your God will be my God. There's a real contrast between gods of the Moabites, and your God will be my God. And there will I die. She gets back to the promised land, and there is a close relative of Naomi. When she gets back, they said, is this Naomi? And she said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. The word Mara means bitterness. For 10 years, dealing with famine and the death of her husband and the death of the two children that she has. She has nothing left in her life. Don't call me joy and happiness. Call me sorrow, bitterness. And yet, because there is a relative of Naomi, and Ruth goes to glean in the fields of this relative. The relative's name is a name you will recognize if you know somewhat about the Bible. That's right, it's Boaz. And so whenever she arrives at the field, Boaz immediately sees her, inquires about her, and then begins to treat her with favor. He says, when we take a break for eating, you come and you eat. And the water that you need to drink, it'll be the water that those men that are out there have drawn for you. And then he says to Naomi, then he says to Ruth, or says to his workers, when Ruth is in the field, don't you dare lay a hand on her. You protect her, you take care of her. And then they said, and leave some grain behind. It evidently doesn't take long for some things to develop in this book, because Naomi finally says, where have you gone? Finds out all of this and says, tonight, yes, you go to where Boaz is. And we will find this culturally not fitting in our society, but in that society, if we talk about a woman sleeping at the foot of the bed, not having high regard, that's about what happens, except it's not a bed. It's where he lay down. She says, lift up the cover off of his feet and lay there under that cover at his feet. The Bible says, in the middle of the night, Boaz wakes up and he's got somebody at the foot of the bed. Who are you? And that's when he recognized what a virtuous woman she is. And so he says, I have an obligation in keeping with the commands of God, at least some relative, the closest relative has an obligation to marry you, because this land belonged to your husband and it's got to stay in this tribe. There have got to be some descendants that can claim this land. Well, the closest relative did not want to do it. He said, I cannot, with the possession that I have, add to this that other land. What the reason for that was, you can come up with all sorts of ideas, commentators do, but for whatever reason, he says, I will not do it. He turns to Boaz and he says, will you take on that responsibility? And so Boaz marries a Moabite woman. There are very few women mentioned in the genealogy of Christ. Isn't that amazing? Ruth is mentioned. Rahab is mentioned. It's rather surprising as you look at the genealogy of Christ how Rahab, the person from Jericho, Rahab the harlot, is in the genealogy of Christ. And here is this Moabite woman. A Moabite could not come. If somebody's a child of a Moabite, could not come into the congregation of Israel for 4 generations. Well, who's Boaz? Boaz, his son Obed, Jesse. And who's Jesse's son? David. David's great-great-grandfather or grandmother was Ruth. How's that for a heritage? How is that for a heritage? And particularly if she were rather young, which you don't absolutely know it, but you can find some reason to believe she might have been very young when she was married. David could have known his great-grandmother. Some of you have known your great-grandmothers. David, if he had that opportunity, gives you some insight into the spirituality of David. I've wondered so much when David comes and faces Goliath. You know how many books of the Bible he had? By faith, he destroyed Goliath. I mean, that's not one of the things specifically mentioned in Hebrews 11. He had the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Judges, and perhaps the book of Ruth. And yet, look at the faith that he had. We do not think about Leviticus building faith. We read through that, just keep going. He knew so very little of the Bible. He didn't have Psalms. He didn't have Proverbs. He didn't have all of the books that talked about God dealing with the Jews through the prophets. Had none of that. And yet, look at what a faith he had. Now, I've said that to say this. If he can have that kind of faith, when he had 7 books, perhaps, if you put Job in there, that may be 8 books of the Bible that he had access to. That's remarkable. And as a young man, he had that kind of faith just from reading those 8 books. What kind of faith can we have if we have all 66 books of the Bible? And how that emphasizes the very importance of what we're trying to do on Sunday night. To go back and to survey the Old Testament and to rehearse some of the things that you already know, to build our faith and help us have a great insight into the spiritual things that are in the Old Testament. And I'm telling you, you got to, if David and I can hardly wait to teach the life of Christ, your life is really going to be changed when we get to study the life of Christ. But so many of you, we're not a part of this study of the Old Testament. We said, as quickly as we can, let's get through the Old Testament. And so, David, I did it. I made it through Judges, and I made it through Ruth, and only had to leave out 90% of what's in there. You are dismissed.